Hi, my name is Jocelyn Neal, and this video is about part writing for the AP Music Theory exam. Specifically, today we are going to work through a sample question that involves part writing from figured bass. Before you watch this video, I recommend that you click on the link below the video and print out the worksheet that we will be using. In fact, you may wish to work the question just like you would on the AP Music Theory exam and then watch the video. So here we go. We are looking at a typical question that would show up as part writing from figured bass. We already know how the format of these questions typically goes. We are looking at a total of 7 chords. We have figured bass. We are asked to part write them according to the conventions of 18th century tonal counterpoint, and we are asked to provide a Roman numeral analysis. As we begin, we're going to be using our chord chart that we've already made. If you would like to review that, please see the other video. Once I've checked the key of my question, I pull out my chord chart. In this case, I have my F minor chord chart available, and I also review the information about figured bass notation. My first step is going to be to list the pitch content of each chord. I do this using the figures, which tell me the intervals above the bass. And for shorthand figures, I'm going to fill those in. My first chord is simply a triad, F, A flat, C. My second chord has the figured bass of natural 4 and 2. I know that 4-2 is shorthand for 6-4-2. So I need the intervals above the bass, B flat, which is a second, C, a raised fourth, which is E natural, a sixth, G, and then I have the note B flat as well. I'm going to circle that B flat because it's the chordal seventh and I need to keep track of my chordal sevenths. My next chord, a third and a sixth above the bass, and the pitch content of that chord is going to be F, A flat, C. My next chord has the figured bass of 6-5, which I know is shorthand for 6-5-3. My next chord has the figured bass of 8-6-4. That tells me it's a cadential 6-4 chord. I need a fourth above the bass, which is F, a sixth above the bass, which is A flat, and the bass note itself, which is C. My next chord is a C. With figured bass 7-5 and natural, I know that that natural applies to the third above the bass. So my pitch content is going to be E natural, G, B flat, plus the bass note C. My final chord is a D flat, F, A flat, triad. Now in this particular instance, unlike the AP exam, I have not given you a voicing for the first chord. One of the things I recommend is that we're going to try this exercise with more than one initial chord voicing. That's great practice for your part writing. For this exercise, let's start by part writing this chord with a C in the soprano. That's a scale degree 5 in the soprano. As I move to my next chord, I'm going to keep my common tone scale degree 5. I'm going to move my F down to E natural, which is the leading tone, and I'm going to step my tenor down to G. My chordal seventh is already in the bass. I don't need to worry about it. I'll keep my common tone C in the soprano, move my leading tone up to F, and step my tenor back up to A flat. I've doubled the third of this chord, and that is absolutely fine. My opening chord progression is a tonic expansion, 1-5-4-2-1-6. My next chord has the pitch content G, B flat, D flat, F. I'm going to keep my common tone alto on the F. I'm going to step my soprano up to D flat. That's moving in parallel tense with the bass. And I'm going to move my alto down to a G. As I move into my cadential 6-4 chord, I remember my rule, always double the bass. I'll let my soprano step down to C, that doubles the bass. I will keep my common tone F in the alto, and I will move my tenor up to A flat. Now, let's take a moment to reflect here. When we have a chordal seventh, as we did in the fourth chord, that chordal seventh needs to resolve down, but the key point here is it needs to resolve down when it moves. You are absolutely allowed to keep that chordal seventh as a common tone into this cadential 6-4 chord. Moving ahead, we're going to use the figures in the figured bass to guide us in our part writing. The dashes tell us how each voice moves. The fourth above the bass, which is an F, moves down to an E natural. The sixth above the bass, which is an A flat, moves down to G, and the octave above the bass, which is a C, moves down to B flat. That B flat is the chordal seventh. It must be handled correctly in its resolution. The B flat steps down to A flat. The leading tone E natural moves up to F, and the G, I'm going to move down to F. Now I've ended up with a doubled third in this chord, but as I fill in my Roman numerals, the reason for that will become clear. Let's back up and fill in our Roman numerals. Our fourth chord is a 2, half diminished 6/5. I'm going to use functional analysis to label my cadential 6/4 chord as a Roman numeral 5, and that moves into a dominant 7th chord, which resolves deceptively to a major triad built on scale degree 6. This is a case of deceptive motion out of a cadential 6/4 chord. And the typical voice leading of a dominant 7th chord into a deceptive cadence is that all upper voices, tenor, alto, and soprano, move to scale degrees 1 and 3. This means that my final chord, which has a doubled F, is the correct voice leading. Anytime I work a figured bass part writing exercise, I like to rework it with a different voicing for my first chord. That's going to help me gain flexibility in my part writing and see where common patterns emerge. So let's do the same exercise again, but we're going to voice our first chord differently. Let's start this time with our first chord voiced with scale degree 3 in the soprano. I'm going to place an A flat in the soprano, my alto on F, my tenor on C. I've already labeled my chord progression for the first 3 chords, and I've already labeled the pitch content of my chords above the staff because that information does not change based on the voicing of each individual chord. Let's work through this example now. From this initial voicing with the A flat and the soprano, I'm going to move that A flat down to G. I recognize a common pattern that can be employed here with my soprano moving down from scale degree 3 to scale degree 2. Now, as I move into my next chord, which is a 1/6 chord, I'm going to allow my soprano and alto to both share a common tone F, and I'll keep my tenor on a C. Moving into my next chord, I'm going to keep the soprano on a common tone F. Now I know that that F is a chordal 7th and will have to be treated appropriately. I'll set my alto on a D flat, and I'm going to allow my tenor to leap down to a G. Moving into the next chord, I know I have to double the bass in a cadential 6/4 chord. I'll move my alto to C. I'm going to maintain the soprano, which was on a chordal 7th, keeping it on pitch F, and step my tenor up to A flat. Moving forward, I follow the voice leading indications from my figured bass. The F moves to E natural. The C moves to B flat. The A flat moves down to G. As I resolve into my final chord, the leading tone in the soprano, E natural, must go up. All outer voice leading tones must go up. My chordal 7th, B flat, in the alto must go down to A flat, and I'll take my tenor G down to F. You'll notice I ended up with a chord for my final chord that has a doubled F in it. That's not only acceptable, it's expected. That's the correct voice leading for that deceptive motion. So now let's just take a quick look and compare these two different solutions. Both have correct voice leading. And we can see what the different voice leading options were that we employed throughout. Now, I recommend we do this one more time because there are some other voice leading options, and the more you explore a particular figured bass question, the more fluent you're going to get at your part writing. We're going to keep that same initial voicing for this exercise. We know that our figured bass, which was shorthand, feeds us our pitch content. That has not changed. As we continue listing the pitch content here, you want to be thinking about the exam conditions. You want to be able to do a figured bass part writing example like this in about 10 minutes. So as you're practicing, set that as your goal. We're going to start again with that same voicing we just studied. I have scale degree 3, which is A flat in the soprano. I have my alto on F and my tenor on C. I'm going to keep my common tone C in the tenor. I love keeping that common tone scale degree 5 when I'm writing a tonic expansion. That's that 3-chord progression that goes, in this case, 1, 5, 4, 2, 1, 6. I'm going to move my soprano down to G, set my alto on the leading tone, and then as I move into my 3rd chord, that G steps down to F, and my alto steps up to F. I love that common tone C in the tenor. Now, as I move into my 4th chord, here I'm going to keep the F as a common tone in my alto and step my soprano back up to G. That F is a chordal 7th, and I know that it cannot go anywhere but down when it moves, and the key word there is when it moves. I can keep that F as a common tone into my cadential 6/4 chord. I have the correct doubling of that cadential 6/4 chord with an A flat in the soprano and a C in the tenor. The voice leading from my cadential 6/4 chord is indicated in the figures. So I do exactly what they tell me. The 6th above the bass, which is A flat, moves down to G. The 4th above the bass is F, and it moves down to E natural. And the octave above the bass is C in the tenor. It moves down to B flat. As I resolve this chord, my chordal 7th, B flat, must go down to A flat. I'm going to step my soprano down to F, and I'm going to move my alto up to F. This creates a doubled 3rd in the last chord, but I already know it's a deceptive cadence, and I already know that that is the correct expected voice leading in a deceptive cadence. Let's fill in our Roman numerals. They haven't changed. They were determined by the bass line and the figures. And there is a 3rd voice leading option for this particular question. Now let's do a little bit of analysis and make sure we recognize the common patterns that we used here. The cadence in this particular example is a deceptive cadence. We know how that deceptive motion works, where only the bass moves to scale degree 6. The opening 3 chords were a tonic expansion, and we've practiced the part writing for soprano bass counterpoint within that particular formula. We recognize the cadential 6/4 chord, and in this case it was moving into a dominant 7th chord, and we know how the part writing for that works. We had circled all of our chordal 7ths and made sure that they were resolved properly. And we've paid attention to the soprano bass counterpoint, which again, in each of these part writing examples was formulaic. In this particular one, our soprano started with a 3-2-1 against our bass 1-4-3. And those scale degrees, which actually execute a nice voice exchange, are one of the common patterns we might study. At our cadential 6/4 chord into the cadence, our soprano counterpoint was 1-7-1, and our bass counterpoint was 5-5-6, which is what we expect with that deceptive cadence. If we go back and check the counterpoint in our first part writing example, that tonic expansion used a 1-4-3 in the bass under a common tone 5-5-5 in the soprano. It's not a very exciting soprano line, but it is a very solid part writing, and that's our goal for this particular question. At the cadence, when our bass had scale degrees 5-5-6, we used a soprano line here of 5-4-3, which is one of the patterns we studied in cadential 6/4 part writing. And we did check to make sure that our deceptive cadence moved all of our upper voices, tenor, alto, and soprano, into scale degrees 1 and 3 at the end of our chord progression in every case. Thanks for watching.